The night sky over Earth was filled with stars, twinkling with serene indifference to the growing threat that loomed just beyond humanity's reach. Lieutenant Sarah Connors leaned against the metal railing outside the outpost, watching as the stars flickered above her. At her side, Max sat quietly, his warm presence offering a strange sense of calm. He was a large German shepherd, retired from active duty but still sharp and alert, his amber eyes reflecting the distant lights. Sarah ran her fingers through his fur absent-mindedly. War was on the horizon, and the air buzzed with tension. But for this fleeting moment, Max made her feel grounded, as though everything would be okay. Humanity had known the Caliph existed for only a few years. Their sleek ships had first appeared near Saturn's rings, scouting silently from a distance. Diplomatic efforts had been immediate, but every attempt to communicate had ended in failure. The Caliph were logical and advanced, far beyond Earth's capabilities, but utterly incomprehensible in their behavior. Their lack of emotion baffled human diplomats, and the alien race seemed equally confused by humanity's tendency toward irrational attachments, especially with non-sentient creatures. Max pawed gently at Sarah's leg. Sensing her unease, she smiled down at him, grateful for his company. Max had been with her through thick and thin, from the chaos of missions to the quiet moments in between. His loyalty was unwavering, and she couldn't imagine facing the coming conflict without him by her side. The message from High Command had come just a few hours ago. Negotiations had broken down, and the Caliph had mobilized their fleets toward Earth. Humanity was officially at war with a species they did not understand, and the odds were not in their favor. Sarah knew what the briefing reports had said. The Caliph were not just superior in technology, but in strategy as well. Their movements were precise, calculated, and without error. The same reports also mentioned how strange the Caliph found humanity's reliance on pets and animals. The aliens had intercepted human communications and studied their cultures, baffled by the relationships humans had with creatures like Max. To the Caliph, pets were a weakness, a distraction from logic. Sarah scratched behind Max's ears. "They don't know what they're missing, huh, buddy?" she whispered. Max tilted his head, sensing her emotions as he always did, and nuzzled her hand in response. Sarah chuckled softly, though her heart was heavy with the weight of the coming battle. The outpost buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared for the first wave of alien attacks. Engineers worked on last-minute repairs to their defense systems, and officers barked orders to their teams. In the midst of it all, Max trotted beside Sarah, his presence both a comfort and a silent reminder of the strange bond between humans and their pets. A few soldiers paused to greet Max, offering quick pats or words of encouragement. "Good boy, Max," one of them said with a grin. "Keep her safe out there." Max's tail wagged slightly in response, and Sarah smiled, feeling a small flicker of warmth despite the tension. She knew that Max wasn't just a pet, he was family. They had been through too much together for him to be anything less. The Caliph would never understand that bond. To them, relationships like the one between Sarah and Max were pointless, a waste of emotional energy. But to Sarah, Max was a lifeline. He had saved her life more times than she could count, not just physically, but emotionally too. When the world became too much, Max had always been there, grounding her with his quiet loyalty. As the night deepened, Sarah's comm unit buzzed, and she answered it with a sigh. "Lieutenant Connors, report to the command center." With a quick pat on Max's side, Sarah made her way toward the heart of the outpost, where the command center hummed with activity. The large screen displayed incoming data from Earth's orbital sensors. The Caliph fleet was on the move, their ships gliding silently through space, a dark and ominous shadow against the backdrop of stars. General Hammond stood at the center of the room, his expression grim as he addressed the gathered officers. "The Caliph will be within firing range in less than 24 hours. We need all hands on deck. Failure is not an option." Sarah took her place among the other officers, Max sitting attentively by her side. The room buzzed with tension as plans were discussed, maps analyzed, and orders distributed. But even in the midst of the chaos, Max remained calm, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. Sarah knew that the battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. The Caliph were an enigma, cold and calculating, and humanity's greatest challenge would be finding a way to outmaneuver them. As the meeting adjourned and the officers dispersed, Sarah lingered for a moment, her thoughts racing. The Caliph had superior firepower, but humans had something the aliens lacked: connection, not just with each other, but with the world around them. With creatures like Max, Sarah knelt beside him, resting her forehead against his. "We'll get through this, Max. We always do." Max licked her cheek, and Sarah laughed softly, the sound a brief reprieve from the weight of responsibility. It was a strange thing, this bond between human and animal, something the Caliph would never understand. But maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what humanity needed to win this war. As the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a soft glow across the outpost, Sarah felt a renewed sense of determination. They had Max, they had each other, and that was a strength the Caliph could never anticipate. She stood and stretched, glancing at the horizon. Somewhere beyond the visible stars, the Caliph fleet was closing in, their intentions unreadable, their technology formidable. But despite the odds, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, because as long as Max was by her side, there was no battle she couldn't face. Max leaned against her leg, offering silent reassurance. Sarah gave him one more scratch behind the ears. "Ready to save the world, Max?" she whispered. His tail wagged in response, and for the first time that night she smiled, really smiled. "Let's show them what they're missing," she said, and together they turned toward the gathering storm, ready to face whatever came next. The alarms blared across the outpost, shattering the quiet dawn. Soldiers scrambled into action as the news came through. Caliph ships had breached Earth's orbital defenses. Sarah was already pulling on her gear, her heart pounding in sync with the rising tension. Max, sensing the urgency, stood by her side, his ears perked and eyes sharp. He was no ordinary dog. He was a partner, trained to detect subtle cues, movements, and threats that even the most advanced sensors could miss. Sarah gave him a quick pat as they headed toward the command post. "Looks like it's go time, Max." As they sprinted to their station, a crackling voice over the comm channels confirmed the grim situation. The Caliph were attacking key cities across the globe, and Earth's defense forces were struggling to hold the line. Sarah's outpost was tasked with protecting a vital satellite relay hub that linked the scattered human fleets. If the relay was lost, coordination between forces would crumble, leaving Earth vulnerable to complete annihilation. Max's nose twitched as they reached the control room. Before the alarms could even pick up a new signal, Max gave a low, growling bark and tugged at Sarah's pant leg. She frowned, recognizing that behavior. He'd done the same thing during ambushes on missions in hostile territories, warning her just seconds before an attack struck. She grabbed her comm unit and activated it. "This is Lieutenant Connors. We have incoming. Prepare defenses now." Before the techs at the console could verify her warning, the ground beneath the outpost trembled, and the distant roar of alien weapons filled the air. Moments later, a Caliph dropship appeared on the horizon, sleek and silent, hovering above the forested outskirts. Pulses of light flickered beneath its hull, energy charges ready to fire. Max barked again, and Sarah knew what that meant. They had no time to wait. She grabbed her rifle, and the soldiers around her rushed to their positions. Defensive cannons powered up just in time to intercept the first wave of incoming fire. Explosions rocked the landscape, scattering debris as energy beams lanced through the air. The Caliph attacked with chilling precision, their drones and soldiers moving in eerie synchronization. Yet, despite their technological superiority, something strange happened during the battle. Max's behavior seemed to have an almost supernatural edge to it. Every time the Caliph forces adjusted their attack pattern, Max somehow anticipated it, nudging Sarah in a new direction just before danger struck. He led her team through narrow corridors and hidden paths, helping them outmaneuver enemy units that should have overwhelmed them. Admiral Velar observed the skirmishes from the bridge of his command vessel in low orbit, frustration building as reports streamed in. Despite the Caliph's superior planning, Earth's defenders proved unnervingly unpredictable. And then there was the odd phenomenon that his analysts couldn't explain. Human soldiers, when accompanied by their animal companions, seemed to fight with extraordinary focus and resilience. Their effectiveness increased significantly, almost as if the presence of these creatures altered the soldiers' tactical awareness. Velar's thin, luminous eyes narrowed as he reviewed footage from the battlefield. On one screen, a human soldier moved alongside a large dog, the animal guiding her through chaotic fire. Each time the human might have fallen into danger, the dog reacted first, directing, warning, and even comforting. The footage showed the soldier glancing toward the dog with a level of trust and connection Velar couldn't comprehend. He turned to his tactical advisor with a cold glare. "Explain this behavior. Why do these creatures affect the human's combat performance?" The advisor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the answer. They seem to rely on emotional bonds, Admiral. It's not something our models can predict or replicate. Their behavior defies standard logic. Velar's frustration deepened. Logic and precision had always been the cornerstones of Calith's strategy. But these humans, these irrational, emotional beings, kept finding ways to turn the tide of battle through means the Caliph couldn't calculate. Their relationships with animals seemed not only a personal indulgence, but a strategic advantage. Velar found it utterly baffling, and yet undeniably effective. Back on the ground, the battle raged on. Sarah's team managed to repel the initial wave, thanks in no small part to Max's keen instincts. As she caught her breath behind a barricade, she rubbed Max's head, murmuring words of gratitude. "Good boy, Max. You're a lifesaver." His tail wagged in response, his tongue lolling happily despite the danger still lurking nearby. Sarah's comm unit crackled with the voice of her commanding officer. "Lieutenant Connors, what the hell just happened? How did you know the Caliph would strike early?" "I didn't," Sarah replied, glancing at Max with a smile. "Max did." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're telling me the dog predicted an alien ambush?" Sarah shrugged, still catching her breath. "It's not the first time." In the brief lull, Sarah noticed something peculiar. The Caliph drones that had been active minutes ago were now frozen in place. Their lights dimmed as if they were waiting. Max stood alert, his ears perked, tilting his head at the odd sight. He gave a curious whine, as if sensing something Sarah couldn't perceive. Then, as if on cue, the drones reactivated and flew off, retreating into the forest. Sarah exchanged a puzzled glance with her team. What just happened? No one had an answer. But as the dust settled and the outpost remained secure, one thing was clear. The Caliph weren't just fighting a conventional war. They were observing, analyzing, and perhaps learning. In the following hours, Sarah noticed more peculiar patterns. Each time Max responded to a situation, the Caliph forces seemed to adjust their behavior. It was almost as if the aliens were testing something, experimenting with the connection between human soldiers and their pets. The realization sent a chill down her spine. The Caliph didn't understand emotions, but they were trying to. She knelt beside Max, scratching his ears as she tried to make sense of it all. "You're more than just a good boy, aren't you?" she whispered. Max wagged his tail, leaning into her touch. There was something about him, something beyond mere instinct. He wasn't just reacting to the world around him, he was sensing it, feeling it in ways that humans couldn't. And somehow, the Caliph had noticed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Max was the key to something bigger. The Caliph saw him as a curiosity, a puzzle to solve, but Sarah knew better. Max wasn't just a tool or a tactic, he was family, and in a war where every advantage mattered, that bond might just make all the difference. The forest surrounding the outpost was unnervingly quiet the next day. Sarah patrolled the perimeter with Max at her side, scanning the tree line for signs of movement. The Caliph had retreated without explanation during the last engagement, and the silence since had only heightened her unease. It felt like the calm before a storm, as if the aliens were waiting for something, observing and learning in ways humanity couldn't predict. Max padded silently next to her, nose twitching at the unfamiliar scents carried on the wind. His ears perked as they approached the edge of a clearing where something strange stood, an alien device unlike anything Sarah had seen before. It hovered slightly above the ground, pulsing with a faint blue light. Wires spiraled out from its base, snaking into the earth, and a low rhythmic hum emanated from it, like the faint heartbeat of some otherworldly creature. Sarah crouched low, signaling Max to stay close. The dog's nose twitched again, and he gave a low whine, eyes fixed on the strange device. His posture was alert, yet not aggressive, more curious than cautious. Sarah reached for her comm unit to report the finding, but as she did, the alien beacon emitted a sudden pulse of light, washing over them like a wave. The moment the pulse hit, Max froze, his ears flattening against his head. He let out a soft, uncertain bark, then began pacing back and forth, whimpering as if trying to understand something beyond Sarah's comprehension. Sarah's heart raced as she tried to make sense of Max's unusual behavior. She had seen him react to danger before, but this was different. It was as if he was sensing not a threat, but a message. Max approached the device cautiously, tail wagging slowly, as if he were greeting a new friend. He pawed at the ground near the base of the beacon and gave a soft, playful bark. To Sarah's amazement, the beacon responded. The hum it emitted shifted slightly, taking on a softer, almost melodic tone. Sarah stared in disbelief. The beacon wasn't just a piece of alien technology, it was some form of communication, and somehow, Max had figured out how to interact with it. She knelt beside him, her heart pounding with both fear and excitement. "What are you doing, boy?" she whispered, watching as Max wagged his tail and nudged the device with his nose. The beacon emitted another pulse of light, and this time, Sarah felt it, not as a physical sensation, but as an emotional ripple. It was subtle, like the brush of a distant memory or the warmth of an old friendship. Max's reaction confirmed what Sarah had begun to suspect. The beacon was transmitting empathy-based signals, communicating not with words but with feelings. Max barked again, softer this time, and the beacon's hum changed in response as if the two were having a silent conversation. Sarah's mind raced, struggling to grasp the implications. The Caliph had been trying to communicate with Earth, not through language or symbols, but through emotion, a concept that human diplomats had completely missed. And somehow, Max, with his intuitive understanding of emotions, had become the key to deciphering the message. As the realization dawned on her, Sarah's comm unit crackled with static. She hesitated for a moment, then activated it. "Command, this is Lieutenant Connors. I found something. It's an alien beacon. But it's not a weapon. It's transmitting emotions." There was a long pause on the other end before a skeptical voice responded. "Say again, Lieutenant? Did you say emotions?" "Yes," Sarah replied, glancing at Max, who was now lying contentedly beside the beacon, his tail thumping lazily against the ground. "And Max is responding to it. I think this is how the Caliph communicate." The disbelief in the command officer's voice was palpable. "You're telling me a dog is communicating with an alien device?" "I know how it sounds," Sarah said, running a hand through her hair, "but I'm not making this up. The beacon isn't transmitting data, it's sending feelings, and Max is picking up on them." There was another long pause, followed by a grudging acknowledgement. "Understood, Lieutenant. Stand by for further instructions." Sarah sighed and sat down beside Max, who nuzzled her hand affectionately. "Good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. The gravity of the situation was beginning to sink in. The Caliph weren't just enemies, they were a species that communicated through empathy, something that humans had completely overlooked, and somehow, Max had become the bridge between their worlds. As she sat in the quiet clearing, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. If the Caliph had been trying to communicate all along, was there still a chance for peace? Or had the conflict already gone too far? And more importantly, could Max's strange connection with the alien beacon be the key to ending the war before it escalated beyond control? The soft hum of the beacon continued, rhythmic and steady, as if waiting for something, an answer perhaps, or a sign of understanding. Sarah leaned against Max, drawing comfort from his presence. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. Max wasn't just a pet. He was a lifeline, not just for her, but possibly for all of humanity. And somehow, this loyal dog might just change the fate of an entire war. The sun was setting behind the forest as Sarah sat with Max beside the humming alien beacon, waiting for further orders. Her mind raced with the possibilities. Somehow, Max had established a connection with the Caliph through the empathy-based signal, breaking a barrier that no human diplomat or scientist had managed to crack. But now came the hard part, convincing Command that they needed to trust a dog to help negotiate with an alien species. Her comm unit buzzed. "Lieutenant Connors, this is Command. We've reviewed your report and, well, it's unconventional, but given the circumstances, we're willing to pursue this as a first contact attempt. Your dog might be our only way to communicate with the Caliph." Sarah exhaled in relief, glancing at Max, who gave her a curious head tilt, as if sensing the importance of the moment. "All right, Max," she whispered, scratching his ear. "Looks like you're getting promoted to diplomat." Within an hour, a small convoy of military transports arrived at the outpost. Sarah and Max were briefed on their mission. They would accompany a team of negotiators to a neutral zone, where the Caliph emissaries had agreed to meet. It was a risky plan. If the Caliph deemed the attempt a failure, it could spark an all-out assault on Earth, but it was a risk they had to take. Max trotted confidently beside Sarah as they boarded the transport, unaware of the weight now resting on his furry shoulders. The convoy traveled deep into the forest, where a temporary meeting ground had been established. Armed soldiers stood at the perimeter, their faces tense, watching for any sign of betrayal. At the center of the clearing stood the alien delegation, their figures tall and imposing. The Caliph emissaries moved with eerie grace, their silver eyes glowing faintly under the fading light. Admiral Velar stood among them, his expression unreadable as he observed the humans with quiet scrutiny. Sarah took a deep breath, holding Max's leash loosely as they approached the Caliph. The atmosphere was tense. One wrong move could doom the fragile peace attempt. Max, however, seemed unbothered by the tension. His tail wagged slowly, and he sniffed the air curiously, his demeanor calm and friendly. Admiral Velar's gaze shifted to Max, and his luminous eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to comprehend the significance of the animal's presence. The Caliph had prepared for many human strategies: deception, negotiation, even ambush. But this they had not anticipated. Max, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, trotted up to Velar and sat down at the alien commander's feet, looking up at him expectantly. Then, without hesitation, Max nudged Velar's hand with his nose, tail wagging in an invitation to play. The alien delegation froze, unsure how to react. Velar stared down at the dog in bewilderment, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else. Hesitantly, the alien commander extended a slender hand toward Max, touching the dog's head. In response, Max gave a contented huff and leaned into the touch, radiating trust and acceptance without a hint of fear or hostility. In that moment, something shifted. The empathy signal from the beacon hummed softly in the background, and for the first time, Velar seemed to understand it. He didn't just hear the emotions transmitted, he felt them. Through Max's simple gesture of trust, Velar experienced something profoundly alien to his people: unconditional companionship. The other Caliph emissaries watched in stunned silence as Velar knelt slowly, placing both hands on Max's head. The alien commander's expression softened, and his silver eyes flickered with a hint of something almost human: understanding. For a species that communicated through empathy, the dog's actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Sarah held her breath, heart pounding in her chest. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for, an emotional bridge between two worlds. Velar rose to his feet, looking directly at Sarah for the first time. He placed his hand over his chest, a gesture that seemed to convey both respect and a newfound connection. "We understand now," Velar said, his voice slow and deliberate, as if the words were unfamiliar to him. "Your relationships are not weakness, they are strength." Sarah smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Yeah," she said softly, "they are." The negotiations that followed were delicate, but the tension had lifted, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. With Max at the heart of the talks, acting as an unintentional mediator, the two sides began to find common ground. The Caliph, for all their logic and efficiency, had never considered the power of trust and companionship. It was a lesson they had only begun to grasp, thanks to the loyalty of one dog. As the discussions progressed, Max continued to wander among the Caliph, offering nudges and playful gestures to the alien emissaries. Each interaction seemed to deepen their understanding, as if the dog's simple acts of kindness were teaching them what no diplomatic treaty ever could. Admiral Velar watched with quiet fascination, his mind racing to process this unexpected revelation. In all his years of command, he had never encountered a concept so powerful, yet so elusive. The dog's empathy was not calculated or strategic. It was instinctive, a reflection of the bond between species that transcended logic. And in that bond, Velar saw a glimpse of a future where the Caliph and humans might coexist, not as enemies, but as allies. The negotiations continued late into the night, with both sides working toward a peaceful resolution. At the heart of it all, Max remained a steady presence, his quiet loyalty binding the two worlds together. When the final terms of the peace agreement were reached, Velar placed his hand over his chest once more, meeting Sarah's gaze with a nod of respect. "You have taught us something valuable," he said quietly, "something we did not know we needed." Sarah smiled, kneeling to ruffle Max's fur. "He's a good teacher," she replied. Max wagged his tail, content to be exactly where he was, at the center of it all, bridging the gap between two worlds with nothing more than trust and a wag of his tail. As the Caliph delegation prepared to depart, Velar turned to Sarah one last time. "Your bond with this creature, it is rare. Cherish it." "I will," Sarah promised, watching as the aliens disappeared into the night, leaving behind a newfound understanding and the hope for a better future. Max leaned against her side, his tail still wagging, as if he knew the important role he had played. Sarah scratched his ears, her heart full of gratitude. In a war fought with weapons and fear, it had been a dog's empathy that had made all the difference. As dawn broke over the forest, casting soft golden light over the meeting ground, the soldiers, diplomats, and alien emissaries prepared for the final steps toward peace. Sarah sat cross-legged on the grass, her hand resting on Max's warm back. The German shepherd lay peacefully beside her, his eyes half closed, as if the events of the previous day hadn't carried the weight of a planet's survival. Yet it was Max, in his quiet and unassuming way, who had accomplished what no human diplomat could. He had bridged the gap between two species, proving that trust and empathy were more powerful than fear or logic. The Caliph delegation returned to the meeting ground in silence, their silver eyes glowing faintly under the morning sun. Admiral Velar stood at the forefront, his tall, graceful figure projecting calm. There was a new understanding in his gaze, a shift that had begun the moment Max nudged his hand in that simple act of trust. Now, the Admiral carried a different presence, one not just of authority, but of humility. The negotiations resumed, this time with more ease than before. Velar spoke slowly, deliberately choosing words that reflected the emotions the Caliph had struggled to comprehend. Sarah listened as the Caliph offered a proposal for peace, not just a ceasefire, but an alliance. They suggested a cultural exchange between their two species, a way to learn from each other's strengths and shortcomings. "We seek to understand," Velar said, his voice calm but thoughtful. "Your people possess qualities we once dismissed, qualities that now seem essential." The human diplomats exchanged cautious glances, and General Hammond, who had been skeptical of this mission from the start, leaned toward Sarah. "I never thought I'd say this," he whispered, "but I think your dog might have just saved us all." Sarah grinned, patting Max's side. "Good boy," she whispered. Max responded with a lazy wag of his tail, his tongue lolling contentedly. The Caliph delegation presented their terms: an immediate withdrawal of their forces from Earth's orbit, reparations to repair the damage caused during the initial skirmishes, and an open invitation for Earth to send ambassadors to their homeworld. In exchange, the Caliph asked for something that surprised the humans: knowledge about the bond between humans and their animals. "You desire to learn about our pets?" one of the human diplomats asked, bewildered. Villar gave a slow nod. "It is more than pets. It is connection, empathy, a concept we have never embraced, but one we now see as necessary." The negotiations concluded with an agreement to formalize the peace treaty in a ceremony that would take place within the week. As the discussions ended, Max wandered among the Caliph once more, nudging their legs, inviting touch and connection. One by one, the alien emissaries responded, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, allowing themselves to engage with the strange, furry creature who had helped forge a path to peace. Admiral Velar approached Sarah, his gaze steady but no longer cold. "Your companion," he said, gesturing to Max. "He has taught me something I did not know I was capable of learning." Sarah smiled, her hand resting on Max's head. "He's good at that." Velar lowered his head slightly, a gesture of respect. "Thank you," he said softly, "for your trust. And for his." As the Caliph departed, Sarah stood with Max at her side, watching them disappear into the forest. The alien ships above Earth began to retreat, and humanity could finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. The war was over, not through firepower or strategy, but through empathy, trust, and the bond between a human and her dog. In the days that followed, the news spread across Earth. The Caliph had withdrawn, peace had been established, and a new era of cooperation had begun. Max became an unexpected hero, his story shared on every news channel and broadcast. "The dog who saved Earth," the headlines proclaimed, though Max himself remained blissfully unaware of his newfound fame. To him, life was simple: stay by Sarah's side, offer love and loyalty, and maybe, if he was lucky, get a treat or two along the way. The day of the peace ceremony arrived, and representatives from both Earth and the Caliph gathered in a grand hall, the walls adorned with symbols of unity. At the center of it all stood Sarah and Max, the unlikely pair whose bond had changed the fate of two worlds. Velar himself presided over the ceremony, his silver eyes gleaming with newfound understanding. Max, of course, was the star of the event. As the treaty was signed, he wandered between the tables, greeting dignitaries with wagging tail and friendly nudges. Even the most stoic of officials couldn't resist his charm. Laughter echoed through the hall, something rare in such formal settings, and it became clear that the peace forged between humans and Caliph wasn't just political, it was personal. After the ceremony, Velar approached Sarah once more, his expression thoughtful. "We have much to learn from your people," he said, "but perhaps the greatest lesson we have learned is this: strength is not found in isolation, but in connection." Sarah nodded, her hand resting on Max's head. "That's something we've known for a long time." Velar inclined his head. "And it is a lesson we will not forget." As the celebrations continued, Sarah found a quiet corner with Max, away from the crowds. She knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You did it, buddy," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "You saved us." Max licked her cheek, his tail thumping against the floor. To him, it was just another day, a good day, spent with his person, doing what he did best, loving without question, trusting without fear. In the end, the Caliph returned to their homeworld, not as conquerors but as allies. Earth entered a new era of exploration, cooperation and understanding, with both species learning from one another. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. It wasn't weapons or strategies that had saved the day. It was a dog's empathy, a bond that transcended language and logic, and a reminder that the greatest strength lies in the connections we share. As the years passed, Sarah and Max continued their adventures, always together, always a team. And whenever someone asked Sarah how it felt to have saved the world, she would simply smile, scratch Max behind the ears and say, it was all him, because in the end, it really was.